Okay, I'll try again today. Maybe I can digress a little bit less. I'll slightly become better and better at this, recovering my still broken English. But let's try to answer this question. Can Stoicism be a common value for creators, and how can empower makers to do their best work? In the age of production, in the age of judgment, because how can we deny that we live in the age of valuation? It's difficult, right? Everything has a number attached to it. The number of views, the number of likes you have. We are slightly becoming a more and more matrix kind society. By that, I don't just make references to the movie, but to the concept that you are a parameterized individual. What does it happen when you become a sum of parameters? It's that you are more and more vulnerable to control, right? Because your behavior, by definition, is influenced by how much this metric goes up and down. Is this a universally bad world to live in? Not necessarily. It depends on the value you attach to those numbers. By now, the value of numbers is basically a virtual card for your social status. You are more relevant and more susceptible, more valuable, more you are more in right of being heard by other people. It's directly proportional, right? The more you are higher in this the status hierarchy, the more people will listen to you, the more you will have the right and the authority to be listened to. So it's a yes and no kind of situation, because this way you apply a filter, a big filter, on a lot of good content and a lot of good people opinions who are like me and you, not able to find structure or an optimal position in this system, which is not necessarily that good but not that bad, because for those people who are more inclined to search for gold nuggets, even among unpopular creators, which are lay people, common lay people, the higher the possibility you find more original and more applicable concept. Because I am right now in a situation, but people with in the fan thousands of views are still considered little. So if you pay attention to this, you can uh, recognize a pattern. The smaller the creator, the more powerful their content, because they are trying in a very competitive environment to assert themselves. So to build up one authority means that the level and the quality of your content has to be really high and really frequent, because that is how you gain in a parametrical based system. How you gain consistency is by following the rules of the environment, which right now in almost every platform is post good quality content with a high real rate. And in this, I am making a big assumption, of course, that social networks are the only possible kind of environment, but that is not the case. For example, at work, and depending if you still are a maker, maybe you are a maker for a business or for a company or whatever, but they choose different implicit parameters. That is, you are being judged by different beings, but you know, human sociology and human psychology, it's kind of the same everywhere. It follow different rules, but still the fact that we are judged in some kind of way, it's even more useful if you want to read it like this, to be able to see practically how much you are being right or wrong. It comes with trade-offs, like everything. But you know, social networks are kind of a generalization of concept that always worked. It would have not worked otherwise. If it didn't lay its foundation on basic human behavior principles, it simply would have not worked. Stuff that doesn't come from principles doesn't work. And that is our first lesson from Stoicism. You know who gave me this quote? Marcus Aurelius. And it's so ingrained in my way of thinking that I didn't even realize it until I said it out loud. Stuff that is not based on principle will hardly work. How do you find those principles? That is, how do you find the stuff that works, that makes you um, make steps onto the ladder, assuming that you are going to make the most positive use of your position? That, which I don't know, people um, do the most disparate kind of things with those, but only people who are able to identify those patterns are able in eventually to become more quote unquote successful. Now, if we have to start to talk about Stoicism, I find it to be the most practical philosophy of them all. Pragmatism as a philosophy was conceptualized itself from early American philosophers, which were heavily influenced by Scottish and Roman philosophies who came before them. And the Scottish philosophers were heavily influenced by Roman and Greek philosophy. Stoicism as a philosophy is very pragmatic and powerful because it's the philosophy of difficulties, the philosophy of people uh, who didn't have theories to rely upon themselves on. Stoicism is probably, with all possibilities, something that comes before even Plato and Aristotle. Zeno the Clitias, Zeno the Stoic, was, I think, a contemporary or probably even earlier than Plato, which is, the guy who tend to associate with the birth of theory. The birth of school itself as a word comes from Plato and Aristotle. So Stoicism is one of the very early philosophies. Is ancient, way more ancient, I guess, or a little bit more ancient than theoretical frameworks. So it was birthed, it born out of necessity. That's why it still is, most of its principles still have this kind of applicability today, because people in their day-to-day life don't have a principle to base their lives on, because theories are difficult. Yes, probably mathematicians have a more roughly understanding of how probability works and how logic works, but anyway, their life is subject to friction, just like you and mine. Sure, they are more capable, and that is their strength. They are able to redact, to synthesize principle to live by, because in your day-to-day life you don't have the time to conceptualize your responses to other people or to a situation. You have principle, which means you have proven heuristics. That is, you base your choices on stuff that you have find out to be pretty much working, or based on somebody else's opinion. Now we come into a different area, right? How much can I trust my opinions and those of other people's? Stoicism had found itself in that position, uh, being such a necessity out-based philosophy, to try and answer those questions. Before we dive into that, there is another little premise to be stated, which is Stoicism, being such an old um, philosophy, is not only didn't only itself try to answer logical question. Logic is a part of early Stoicism with Chrysippus, with Zeno and Zenone, and so. But it always has been, and always was, an ethical kind of philosophy. That is, it was meant to enable you to conduct a certain kind of positive, value-based behavior, which is, kind of a edgy subject, right? Because who am I to tell you how to to tell you how to behave, but they tried and make some universal principles that could be universally applied, right? Try to be as just as you can, not commit injustice. Try to be as disciplined as you can. Try to be very rigorous in the way you work. Try to be courageous, brave, and wise, with wisdom being a mix up of logic and experienced person. And depending if you are, a private worker or a manager or a king, even Stoicism was highly adopted by emperors of various extraction because it was a pragmatic philosophy, basing itself on these kind of self-evident principles, right? That is probably the power of it, and maybe also the reason why it never was so successful as other um, philosophy, which were more practical, could offer more specific advices. But still, for some reason, which I can't I can't root in any evidence apart from the fact that it was always applied by people in very finding themselves in very hard situations. Historically, people who joined the Stoic movements were always kind of more brave, more wise, more disciplined than others. We could make a spectrum of Stoic behaviors and Stoic philosophers. Some of them are really famous, like Seneca, like Marcus Aurelius, like Epictetus. But there are also unfamous Stoic philosophers who were as badass as the famous ones. I'm thinking about Gaius Rufus, which was the teacher of Epictetus, but also I am thinking about Frontone. I guess his Latinized name is Fronto, which was one of the personal teachers of Marcus Aurelius. And that is the reason why Epictetus himself was a slave. That is the reason why I think it applies to nowadays as well. It is a philosophy of extremes. People who tend to fall in the Stoicism spectrum of values were either really, really in a hard position in society or really, really well positioned in society, like philosophers, like kings or rich people. A lot of rich people, like Seneca, were Stoics, and also people who kind of went the whole way from being really, really maladjusted and maladapted to society, going all the way to being recognized. The chief example of this kind is Cicerone. Cicero was a layman from humble origins, but applying himself with all his might, came to be the most important political figure, or one of the most important political figures in his times. Now, why is it the case that such simple principle and such simple quotes you can essentially base your life upon? As I told you, I don't really know, because being a pragmatic philosophy to extreme, refusing a systematization, it is hard to conduct a more comparative and exact analysis of the reason why. But I think that we could trace, or we could hypothesize, we could make a theory of our own, that beliefs themselves, the theory of belief, the theory of being convinced by something, traces itself back into evolution. Risk management, that is, the kind of apparatus you use to deal with risk, is the same you use in belief formation. This is one of the theories out there. The book from which I built this opinion upon is Six Impossible Things Before Breakfast. That book essentially says you form your beliefs out of a risk management system, which is the same that it's supposed to keep you alive. That system keeps on building complexity until you start making theories. Now, it is not certain, it's my speculative opinion, but I guess that together with Stoicism, all the theories which were born in that moment in history before practical and systematized scientific theories, but after the evolutionary phase of belief formation, in that ambiguous territory, very powerful philosophy such as Stoicism or Zen and other kind of philosophy that are asystematic but really powerful were born. Sorry for that convoluted phrase structure. Point being, there is more than one kind of Stoicism, and those early philosophies, share this characteristic of being ethical related, of being helpful in structuring general world views that can be applied to many different situations, especially those dealing with extremes. Think about this. How hard should have been to live in such big cities in ancient times? Think about this. Recently, I found out that Rome, at its highest peak during the time of Augustus, had the same number of citizens as Hong Kong today, or the number was um, similar in nature. Maybe not the exact number, but not that uh, less of a popularization happened. That this means it was really, really hard in ancient times to assert yourself as a thinker, as a political figure, as a professionist, because of high numbers, really, really, really concentrated in such small cities. Rome used to be way smaller than it is today because it was a center of control of a way bigger empire. Can you start to spot the analogies with the situation we makers live in today? I guess they kind of become self-evident, right? First of all, you are a risk manager because your ideas and the product of your work and the amount of time you put in your work could be completely wasted because of big numbers, because you put your content into a context that is really, really highly competitive and cheaty in behavior, right? You can tell by yourself that people try to go unethical ways to make themselves heard, both starting from clickbait titles to thumbnails that are kind of shady, right? And that is the reason why is because we try to we are forced to make ourselves heard in a competitive environment, and the most straightforward way is to regress, to be in regret, to um, go back to a risk-based society. Pay attention to this. Most of the content you click on because you think it's relevant to you. But if you are able to read the subtext in those content, most of the way they are conceptualized and framed is, if you don't expose yourself to my content, you are going to be in a kind of danger, or in a danger of some kind, or on the opposite side of the spectrum. If you click on my content, you follow the risk of being highly entertained with stuff which might be dangerous in some kind in nature, maybe very unpopular opinions. It is kind of self-evident, right? How many videos have you clicked in your life which had a kind of self-branding like this? Don't do this, don't do that. If you do this, you are never going to be accepted in society, or such and such common belief is completely wrong, and if you believe that, you are an idiot. I was a little bit confabulating on this because I was thinking about this out loud. But the point is, it's simple, right? Point being, we influence the behavior of others in a salient based manner. What was I thinking again? I had this really important concept to share. Oh my, I lost it. Anyway, you can go out in your own um, YouTube landing page and make yourself convinced with what I'm saying, right? It's kind of self-evident. Oh, I found it again. I'm sorry. The point being, those kind of titles are polarized. It's a form of polarization. That is, it's a kind of communication that deals in extremes. Now, that being said, if you follow my analogy of why having yourself a background of extreme of philosophies that deal with extremes, being even unsystematized, can be a really powerful tool. Why? Because it teaches you how to deal with extremes, either by ignoring them, like Stoicism and Zen philosophy, or by developing a concept called ataraxia, that is, not refusing to accept polar opposites, but learning how to be indifferent and to base your judgment upon the fact of a kind of strong normalization. Now, Stoicism, if you ask me, probably wasn't as much as Zen. It failed in explaining how to obtain such um, a point of view, such a judgment, such knowledge, and because it didn't offer tools, it offered maxims, right, and ideals, very strong ones, but in the mm, in the course of history, step by step, different civilization has kind of absorbed stoic principles and tend to develop tools, more sophisticated tools to to deal with those. Neo Stoicism, for example, applied Christian tools of self control and maxims from Stoic philosophy to start to conceptualize those in a more profound, in a more technical manner. But this is, I guess, historically speaking, it may be untrue. I mean, technically speaking, yes, it is correct that more powerful philosophies, which tend to be theory based, which tend to have general answers as much as specific application, like Aristotelianism, like Platonism, like later scholastics and medieval philosophers, had to offer theories and tools based on tool design. Those philosophy enabled you to become a maker by teaching you how technical endeavor works and how design works and how you can empower yourself by tool making. But they all lacked they failed in preparing you to accept the consequences of tool using. That is why I think there is a fracture between different knowledge courses, right? Some some philosophy enable you to think and to product to become more productful by teaching you how to learn substantially, um, such as the aforementioned more famous philosophies. But they all lacked an ethical aspect because the successive degree of specialization impede them to made a sort of dogmatic approach not to try to apply technical endeavors to morals. Rightfully, that was a smart decision. If I had to find a counterfactual of that, it would be probably socialism and Marxism. Those philosophies try to apply technical ideas to moral problems in trying to teach people how to behave, and that failed badly. It failed really, really badly. But ethics on its own had to borrow some of those principles. Now, the discourse is it's wild, right? It's hard to say where does logic end and where does ethics begin. But it is untrue and it is unjust to say that those philosophies, those undeterministic philosophies like Stoicism and Zen, didn't have tools. They did have tools to enable you to become a more self-controlled individual. While you could apply to different kind of studies and different kind of roads to become a more empowered learner. They try to specialize uh, on meditation-like behavior. All Stoics philosophers had a kind of life that reflected their principle, but for some reason it is unknown as a future of Stoicism and Zen Buddhism that they kind of came packed with a certain kind of behavior prescription that was meant to make you a more controlled individual by meditating, by keeping a diary, by being reflexive with writing. Almost all Stoic philosophers had some, at least some kind of way of being meditators. Some more than others, being unsystematized the way it is, some had really more practical behavior and some didn't. Now, I am not in the position to tell you how to behave because who am I to tell you? But, and pay attention, this is a kind of indirect form of persuasion. There are really good books that teach you how to become a Stoic philosopher. I don't feel comfortable in being the one that tells you how because I just don't like it when people try to tell me how do I have to behave. But if you're interested, the books are there to learn. The same books from which I learned. For example, Pierre Hadot, which is a French philosopher which was always interested in ancient philosophy, published a really interesting book about how ancient philosophers embodied their principle, not just Stoics, whole ancient philosophers like Pythagoras, like Plato himself in the views he had about the Republic and the social views that he had. Search for it. I can't remember the English title, I'm sorry. But Pierre Hadot spelled Pierre Hadot. Also, another philosopher has a really great book about ancient philosopher did live following their principle for self-control by Michel Foucault, which is another French philosopher. I don't know the reason why, but their answers are there. If you search for them, you can find how these people lived, embodied those behaviors. I'm trying to remember the Foucault book. That is a little bit more hard to say because most of what Foucault said was during his lectures at Collège de France. So you have to search for it online until you find the right book. Those are organized in different ways depending on the editors. I could tell you the Italian version and you will do nothing with it. But now that I made this big premise, that you can, in fact, as a maker, and you have good reasons to believe that you are in a position to be both interested in how Stoicism works and technical philosophies as well, as a way to become a better learner. But, and this is probably the last big thing we are going to talk about today, the first follows the other. When you have a solid prescription about how to behave and how your behavior helps you keep control of yourself, which is uneasy, I think, to do and to learn nowadays. The only thing I can relate to that is emotional intelligence. But emotional intelligence is not easy to learn. You have to go to therapy, or you have to work on yourself really hard and put yourself into challenges and read a lot of books. It's not easy. The things I guess Stoicism like philosophies can be really be of help is because they are a simplified version of the complex tools we use today, such as psychotherapy. There are a lot of psychoanalytic schools of thought that rely heavily on philosophy. Not all of them, not maybe not the famous one, but a lot of practical psychotherapists did base their opinions and their practices out of Stoic principles. Right? One of the most famous schools, if I don't recall, uh, if I recall exactly, is from Paul Watzlawick, right? Which is one of the fathers of the Californian school of psychotherapy, which kind of took a pragmatic approach, stealing from everyone he could steal from, both from Freud, Jung, early experimental psychologists, and philosophies, and Stoic philosophies, or philosophies of different kind. The reason is when challenges become really hard, such as the ones we face today because of the complexity of the environment. Challenges today are really hard because they are really complex. It's really hard to simplify um, and find simple ways to get where you want to be. It's because the principle we aforementioned stated, right? Because life tends to be, and society tends to be, always more and more complex. So tracing back to sort of self-evident principles on how to conduct your life, to be more chill. I'm not telling you this in order to make you join a cult, right? I'm sorry, I'm kind of serious about this, but I don't know how different cultures can absorb this kind of concept. And also, in today's culture, there is a kind of toxic masculinity movement which I don't really buy. I don't really like extra far right behavior, and we talked about it in the last video. The fact that some extremist philosophies tend to steal to useful ideas doesn't make them automatically good. Those are ideologically based assumptions and way of making communication. I don't like, for example, the way Jordan Peterson communicates nowadays because it's ideologically based. 100%, you can't mistake that. He used to be a really great theorist and communicator. Nowadays, he's power oriented. So that is why I will always, when we talk about these kind of things and we enter in the specifics of ideology, take a step back. I am more oriented on the Ryan Holiday side of things, which is also a big promoter of Stoicism. Also, I tend to be more cautious. I will probably never tell you what to do or what to think, but indirectly being suggestive by giving you simply the the books that I read, or giving you references of the people that influence me to behave a certain way. Why do I keep on stating this, and why do I keep being so cautious about it? Because behavior is the most powerful, if not the only, tool you have in your hands. And by this, I tend to frame thinking itself as a kind of behavior. The people who control your behavior control your life, control what and how you think. That is the reason why Stoic philosophy and early philosophy are such powerful tools. In a society which is basically influenced, directed, and influence control, right? We are in an influence based society. Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? That I don't know. My system of evaluation is essentially tries to make uh, spoil differences. I try to separate the good influence from the bad influence. It's We are in the realm of relativism, so I will try not to make myself too much into that controversial statements. But it is undeniable that today we live in a complex and extremely polarized um, sets of environments. Even your work environment is probably extremely competitive, because nowadays we are following the successful example of the American model, which has been proven both successful and at times hard to follow. But taking for granted that you can think whatever you like. I will never tell you what to think. If you love Jordan Peterson, or if you are a listener of extreme right philosopher, but also kind of like ancient philosophy, who am I to tell you not to do that? I've got my opinions. They are informed, but they are at the end just opinions. How can we end up? What was I talking about? Yes, probably philosophy is a kind of neutral environment which can help you really, both as a maker and as an individual, to strive, because it provides you with the tools to keep control of yourself and your behavior in an environment that essentially competes to control your behavior and how you experience and how you behave inside a certain environment. Those are not the same thing. You adapt your behavior based on your environment, right? So if you want to be adapt to an extreme behavior, you have to learn how extremes work. And that is technically the realm of statistics, which is very useful, but we will dive into another day. Maybe the day I can learn myself how to be more concise. I am still learning. Um, and on the other hand, it is the realm of ancient philosophy. That being said, I only touch on three or four key aspects on Stoicism, which is kind of deep also in other domains. It kind of has really powerful quotes, also for clear mind thinking. Critical thinking, I guess, is born out of common lay people. Those principles were then slightly and a little by little embodied by early philosophers, which were becoming always and always more technical. Socrates is a good example of this. He's somewhat, he's already with say with a foot in his grave, right, so to speak, because he was trying to go to the source of that knowledge, trying to understand how that structured knowledge worked. That is the reason why Plato had a lot to work on from his teacher, because Socrates did a really uh, tough job. He spent all his life trying to understand what were the patterns underlying that powerful philosophy and those philosophies that came before him. That being said, critical thinking as a tool to wrap up our focus about behavior and behavior change, and how to behave in certain environments, how to be adaptive in your thinking, those all sum up to the ability of being a critical thinker. That is, being a skeptic, skepticism being another of the early philosophy, really close to Stoic thinking for some aspects at least. One of my favorite quotes of, um, of Stoic philosophers is from Fronto, from Marcus Aurelius' teacher, and essentially I'm paraphrasing here, but the quote sounds like this: don't ever think yourself as an expert. Be always unarrogant toward knowledge, because skepticism breeds information. It it will always be the kind of attitude, the kind of mental attitude from which you can find new information from. So being yourself, considering yourself a beginner, having a beginner mind, right? You see how it is similar in nature to Zen Stoicism, to Zen philosophy. But the quote essentially says this: when you come with an unprincipled and an expert mind, you always have the the bonus of being able to take new information from the environment. And that's the key insight I took for my life, being trying to be a better learner and a better maker, right? Being always able and open to new interpretation of the same data. You can see that the the early traces of technical thinking are already in Stoic philosophy, and then progressively became more and more specialized heuristics till modern science. But if you think about it from an historical perspective, which is not the only possible one, people like me and Karl Popper, because of our studies and because I am basically a self-taught philosopher, because I didn't went to philosophy school. I just studied the books. I just read the books. But the historical approach is that sees science as based on common sense. Think about falsification from Karl Popper. The principle is you can't prove something true unless you have a way to prove it false. Because if you don't have a way to show it's false, you don't have a way to make determinations about it at all. This kind of thinking, which is what we are basing actual science on, actual people with technical power buy into this stuff, is directly took from ancient philosopher. Popper was a study, was a disciple of Protagoras and Gorgia and Parmenides, right? The Sophism philosophers, which were also philosophers which didn't have a theory at all. They were all kind of skeptics, right? And that is a direct son of unorganized philosophies. Now, to wrap up all we said to this point. One, Stoicism is good for you because it teaches self-control in a world of extremes. Two, you are the sole responsible of how you behave and how you adapt your behavior into your environment, but that is based on critical thinking. Third, anyone can learn critical thinking even by reading Plato books and Socrates books and books from ancient philosophers and Marcus Aurelius Meditation, because that's the first time in which this whole idea of critical thinking, of thinking for your own, started to be a thing. So it's a really simplified version of hard concepts, of hard technical concept. And you have not only the you know the possibility, but also kind of the duty to be a critical thinker for yourself if you want to succeed, because that is the only way. It's a logical approach, right? If you want to be original and sustain the stress of being in such a competitive environment, you have to kind of become a better and a more critical thinker. That, I think, sums it up. I wanted to make more of a social kind of universality of it, not also for makers, but also for different kind of cultures. I will probably not be able to do it today because, as you have seen, I still have some troubles articulating my thoughts out loud in English. I will try to be more and more concise, to You have to excuse me, but as all creatives, as all makers, I be erratic in nature. So you will have to stand with me. Those, one, 10, 20, 100 followers I right now have, until I become more disciplined myself and start to make more precise contact, maybe prescripted, with a list of things to follow. I think I will do not more than 2 or 3 videos like this ones in which I think out loud, because I am taking myself steps into understanding the nature and the shape of this channel. I really don't know what it is going to be about. It is probably going to be about pop culture and makers culture, that is providing you with references and thoughts and opinions and even tools, because I am a programmer, so it is not impossible that I will share my programs with you, but it's going to be probably more about the philosophy of creativity, and I will have to little by little make it more and more precise. So you will have to pardon me if sometimes I just freeze while I am thinking out loud, but it's doable. I believe in this. I believe in communication. I believe in the power of critical thinking. I believe more than these things in the power of collective thinking, because being an independent thinker is a powerful thing, but more powerful than that is 2 or 3 or 4 independent thinkers that discuss among themselves constructively, of course, because that breeds new information. This idea is borrowed from Benjamin Franklin and his autobiography, which I recently read, um, which is really good. I recommend to you. If you're not American, maybe this is not a self-evident, obvious fact statement, but it's really good. And he had this group called the Junto, which I dream in my wet dreams to reproduce, which was a community of debaters, which were really all smart people. He selected himself his friends, so that would be a good goal for this channel, to form and to become a community of independent thinkers. Will I be able to do this? I don't know. It's an hard and complex word. I will try my best, following this principle, which I essentially base my life upon. The only thing I can do is try.